See football. I do several, but I'll do fantasy football calculator. Cool. Okay. Sweet.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome on in. Pull up a chair around the table. We are joined once again, or we are here once again for another night around the Redraft Roundtable, and I'm joined across the table here by my co-host Grant. Grant, we are full swing. NFL training camps are in full swing. We've had preseason actions. We've had everything going on. The calendar says August, but it also means it's football season. We are back to football season now.
I know. We've had games played already. We've had some quarterbacks that have been drafted. They've taken some snaps, and the hype is real. The hype is real. We are just a few weeks away, and a lot of teams, unfortunately, are experiencing some injuries that we'll go into later. But a lot of big news, a lot of games to kind of digest, and a lot of different players that are trying to earn their spot on the final rosters.
Yep. I'll be honest. I've not watched too much preseason. I've seen some highlights here and there, so I'm not one that is dedicated to. I need to watch every snap of preseason, but I think it's good to understand. Maybe not from personnel, but from a package valuation in the preseason. What do coaches like to do as far as combination of offense packages? How are they playing? But as you mentioned it too, we kind of get to see this is the time of there are news pieces coming out. There are also a lot of fluff pieces coming out, things that we're supposed to click on and get a lot of clickbait that ends up then shaping our thoughts. And so we have to practice some discipline on what's actual news versus what's fluff. Yeah, so I know that can be hard, and I think we're not this weekend. There may be some redrafts happening this weekend, but next weekend's probably the first big weekend of the year for most redraft leagues, if not heading into Labor Day. But next weekend's probably the biggest one as we look into getting back in the swing of redraft. So, Grant, what is the first news item that, as you look at it, you think is pretty interesting to talk about as we look at for items of note as we prepare for drafts?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of, I would say there's been injuries from a multitude of players, right? A multitude of teams. But I think for fantasy purposes, I think the biggest one has been just the Vikings, honestly. You have J.J. McCarthy, drafted from Michigan. He will be, and I had some knee problems. Apparently, wasn't really sure what was going on. We were getting the whole who's the starter, who's going to be second string, right? We got that with him and Sam Darnold for kind of all this offseason since the draft, really. And we talked about this actually a few weeks ago. We're like, why would you not have J.J. McCarthy start? You want him to just full send it, the Vikings need to get him experience and reps, and come to find out, right, he has a nagging knee issue and looks like it's his meniscus, and they finally go in there, and instead of it being a trimming, which is, like a several week timeline, it's now a full repair. So he is out the full 2024 season, which I think is the biggest news because that obviously trickles down and affects all the Vikings players because he'll be the first first round draft pick as a quarterback to miss his rookie season. That makes sense. If I said that any more confusing, I'll try to do it again. He is the first rookie quarterback to miss his first year of football due to injury. So that's kind of an interesting stat in the modern era. So basically, before even playing a snap, right, he is unfortunately able to play anything. And so, the Darnold has become the starter, and which affects a lot of the Vikings players, especially Jefferson, which we've kind of seen drop in ADP a little bit.
Yep.
I think, Jeff, you've probably seen he was around 1.3, 1.4 maybe, and he's down to 1.8, 1.9 right now.
Yep. Early parts of summer, early parts of August, he was taken as high as the 102. He was still somewhere valuing him the same way. Which yeah, now it's around the 108, but he's going at the end of the first round still. And I think for myself personally, I was viewing JJ McCarthy as probably potentially a mid-year starter, not necessarily a
Mm.
full year. Getting the full year, get some reps, and the whole talk was, maybe it's by week 5 or after their bye week because they have a pretty rough start to the season. So, if they don't do well, you know, they might start him then, which it's not a bad thing to think about, but you're right. I think now that we know that it's going to be Sam Darnold for the season, um, it is the question. I think for me, I was thinking there is some risk with Justin Jefferson this year, but I think it's a minimal risk. And so the question really is there a lot more risk if you draft Justin Jefferson knowing Sam Darnold's the quarterback for the season? I think that's the biggest question is he a big risk at
Yep.
his ADP? So,
Yeah, and I think that's where you're kind of having to straddle the fence, right? Is okay, you have a quarterback who we know his ceiling. We've seen it for
yep.
multiple years. We know what we're getting out of him, but he has a weapon, just Justin Jefferson, who is incredible. So it's always the situation of like, well, it's a bad offense, but fantasy wise, are they just going to cram every single throw to Jefferson and hope and pray? And the defense is like, hey, you know what? We'll give Sam Darnold a 4 yard little slant pass to Jefferson every single play because that's not going to win them football games. And the
Mm-hmm.
Vikings lose every game, but Jefferson's number one receiver for the year, right? So that's where you get the kind of the balance is understanding bad offense, but volume, right, with a really good player. And we saw that with Christian McCaffrey of the Panthers, right? We saw that a lot, where it's like he was the best
Yep.
player in fantasy on really one of the worst teams in the NFL several years in a row.
Yep.
So, what for you personally? Are you thinking? Are you buying low? Like if you're the eighth pick, are you like, hey, this is great. He falls to me. I'm snatching him. Are you hesitating a bit, finding someone else? Are you going for Sun God if he's there, or like an AJ Brown, or are you sticking with Jefferson at 8?
If I'm at 8, I think I'm going to pass. And I think my
Okay.
my theory is probably I'm going to pass. I'd take Amon Ra because it's a better offense. And
Mm-hmm.
if he's healthy for a full year, I mean, the targets in Detroit go through the sun god. So I would take him over Jefferson. I would have done that before this injury, though, too. So that hasn't really changed my opinion. I probably would take AJ Brown now over Justin Jefferson, but I'd also
Mm-hmm.
be willing to see if I'm in a 10, 12 team league, if everybody's down on him and he comes back at around at the second, I'm probably then going to take him again. Um, but I take him in the second round as my wide receiver too, and see. I'd want to play the how much does this impact people's fear?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the challenge with that is it's name recognition. It's Justin Jefferson. He should be fine, like you said. But
Mm-hmm.
then it's also, well, he's linked to Sam Darnold. So
Yep.
interesting, interesting. So here's kind of how I look at the Vikings, though, too. And I think we have to look at this. I'm not one to say the coach matters so much that it impacts how much the players play, because players are the ones that will go out and produce. Like they're the ones that putting out what the coach, like the scheme the coach wants to do. So from a schematic standpoint, I will say I think the offense in Minnesota with their current head coach, he is a comes from the Rams, comes from Sean McVay. They're a very fast paced offense. It's a very good offense where McVay, when he has had success with pretty much every quarterback. I don't want to say just because we saw Nick Mullins, just because we saw Josh Dobbs do well last year, that, oh, it doesn't matter who's quarterback, anybody can do well. Because Nick Mullins, I mean, the 2 games that Justin Jefferson blew up last year outside of Kirk Cousins, 2 of those were against Detroit. And they were one of the
Mm-hmm.
worst passing defenses out there. So I think we have to take that into consideration. Um, so this is going to be kind of a long-winded way of thinking about this here, but it is a good coaching
Mm,
staff. When Sam Darnold, now we all know the fun, I'm seeing ghost Sam Darnold when he played for the Jets. But in 2018, when he was playing for the Jets, it was Todd Bowles as his head coach. Todd Bowles was the coach with most recently Tampa Bay. Um, so he's had, some success, but he's also had a lot better quarterbacks. Tom Brady, to be more specific. So he's seen some success. Um,
mm,
Wide receivers, though, when Sam Darnold was with the Jets, it was Quincy Enunwa, uh, Robbie Anderson, or Chosen Anderson, I guess now Robbie Chosen. Um, so they weren't the type of talent that Justin Jefferson is. So I'm not going to sit here and say that that was all Sam Darnold then. Um, because now Sam Darnold couldn't beat out Brock Purdy, hurt Brock Purdy last year with the 49ers. He was the backup last year to Brock Purdy.
mm,
Is that so? My question is: was Sam Darnold really that bad, or is Brock Purdy that
mm.
anomaly that it was just going to be Brock Purdy all the time with Kyle Shanahan?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Like, in that whole the quarterback room in the 49ers has been really weird, right? Because they
Right.
have on talent wise, they have the best team outside, like the best offensive skill players probably in the NFL. So a lot of people were arguing devil's advocate of like, doesn't matter who you put back there, if you're
Right.
handing the ball to Christian McCaffrey or throwing it to Debo Samuel, like an eighth grader could do that,
Yep.
and the 49ers probably win 8 games a year, right? Sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, you're right. That definitely plays a part into it. I mean, I think Brock Purdy is efficient. I think but again, it's Kyle Shanahan has a certain way with. I
Right.
mean, like look at um, Cowboys backup. I'm losing it.
Oh, the
He's with the Cowboys now.
oh,
Trey
it's
Lance.
Trey Lance. Yes, Trey Lance. Well, he's a third string,
Yes,
but
Trey
yeah.
Lance, same situation, right? Like highly touted
Yep.
quarterback was supposed to come in and all this stuff, and it just didn't work out. And on paper, you think him and Purdy are similar with a lot of things and different in others, right? But
Yep.
you know, yeah,
Athletically, though, Trey Lance would beat him. He has a bigger arm as far as the ability to
yes,
throw, and he's a running quarterback.
yes,
So,
yeah,
yeah, it's so
yeah,
that's where my conundrum is. I can make the same argument of, the Vikings head coach is a McVay guy, and McVay also has had success with more than just Stafford. Obviously, you put the right quarterback in, you have the most success. So I don't think, I guess my way of thinking about this is Justin Jefferson is not a buy, or it's not a full fade. It's a don't overpay and see if the fear in other people's thought process push him down too far. And if he does, then
mm,
I'll go ahead and grab him. I think
yeah.
that's the play.
Okay.
So
Another kind of aspect we're talking about overpaying for players.
yeah.
Related news is both CeeDee Lamb and Jamar
Mm,
Chase are holding out of practices, training camps, etc. They have the whole offseason over
yep.
contract disputes. They want
Yep.
the Justin Jefferson bag. They want the 35 mil a year. They want the guaranteed money. So with those, right, if you think about it, right, of the top five the top five receivers right now, they're going in the first round roughly. Three of them have questionable situations. CeeDee
Yep.
Lamb with his contract, Jamar Chase with his contract, Justin Jefferson has, potentially lost Jordan Addison with an ankle injury today. We don't know the extent
Yep.
of that, right? And then McCarthy is obviously out. So, how? What do you think about Lamb and Chase? Do you think there's anything worth discussing with them? Are you taking them at their ADPs? Is the contract thing you think a problem, or is it going to be something where you just draft them and go?
Now, has Lamb held out, or not Lamb? Chase, has he held out the entire time, or did he show? Has he shown up to
I
some
think it's just
things?
recent. I think it's the
Okay,
like it's just these preseason games and the practices. I think this month, and I think Lamb's
okay,
done the whole off season and gotten fined
right,
like $2 million, but
right.
Chase has just done like the recent 2 weeks or something. I think.
So I would probably draft Chase over Lamb because he didn't
Hmm.
hold out the entire offseason. I think it hurts Chase's value still because, you know, it's practices that all of a sudden you're going to go up to, games and you've not prepared yourself for the game speed. That's a greater chance of injury. So I think that's the biggest risk that I see of players that have held out and have not practiced. Yes, they can do off-season workouts, but Grant, you and I have in our past, not to this level, but to some extent, have played sports or done physical activity where if you put your body in a certain position where it's not ready for it, it's probably going to get hurt. And these are very extreme situations that they're not ready for it. So I would say it's more of a risk that they're going to get hurt than not. So I'd
Hmm.
probably avoid more. I'm okay, just it's probably me, you know, being biased just because I like the player of would still draft Chase, but if I'm honest, there has to be some concern there. So I have to be ready for a
Hmm.
concern. The question then is,
Yeah.
do you draft then instead of one of those, do you just go with a Tyreek who's nearing or has started that age apex decline? Or do you take an Amon Ra and say, look, he's been there, he's practicing, he's there, it's a no brainer. I'm just gonna take the guy that's there. Um,
Yeah.
that's the other way to
Yeah.
think
I think
about it.
that's good. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that we've talked about this before, but your first at least two picks, right? You want them to be as sure a thing as ever, right? You can start
Right.
getting creative and cute later on in the draft, and you've watched X players tape and all these things, and you can start doing your hero picks, but you really want to go after sure things. And so to me, I think this is one year where I think it's very reasonable if you have in let's say a half point PPR 10-person league, for example, or whatever. It's not super flex, and you got like the third or fourth pick, right? I don't think it's the craziest thing to go and get Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's going around 7 or 8, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't think that that's crazy because you're going for consistency. You're going with a good quarterback on a Super Bowl aspiring team that has a good defense. Like all those factors work out well to that offense getting the ball and scoring. And so this could be interesting top 10. I could see it really being different. And also too, like this is August 14th and we're recording this.
Yeah.
A lot of drafts happen Labor Day. A lot of drafts happen next few weeks. So I
Yep.
mean, who knows? Maybe CD Lamb ends up with this $30 million a year deal, and his ADP settles at that 3-4 spot, and he's consistent. But I mean, for now, I agree with you. I think you have to go with Tyreek or Amon Ra if you have that availability.
Yeah, and if you're sold on just I need a wide receiver in the first round, and you're saying I'd rather take a wide receiver and wait on running back, then yeah, absolutely, I'd probably lean there.
Mm.
Or like you said, in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, if we hear they've signed, and in the next that span of time we don't hear any injuries or any concern of injuries
Mm.
coming out, that's then part of what I would be looking for of is there something that's notable of injuries? Do these players have an injury risk because, oh, hey, I tweaked a hamstring because, I haven't been doing this. So the reports are, oh, I tweaked a hamstring. So that's what I would be on the lookout is if I'm looking for news, it's what's the contract updates? Do they start practicing and do they get injured because of
Yep.
that? So
Yeah, and thing to note too is to kind of close up the injury news is make sure that you're also paying attention to offensive linemen
yes.
and other skill positions because in fantasy it's easy to look at receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends, etc. But offensive linemen play a big part in the
Yep.
quarterback's ability to throw the ball and all these other basic football things. So
Yeah.
pay attention to that. If you're seeing a lot of injuries or a lot of shakeups, or a rookie who's getting a start, and there's a lot of oh, this person's playing left guard, now they're playing right guard, or like there's a
Right.
lot of changes happening, that could definitely affect a team's offensive output.
Yeah, and that's a news of note for also again San Francisco. We didn't mention Ayuk, who still doesn't have a deal, but he falls in the same camp as like Lamb and Chase. You don't have to take him at the
Mm-hmm.
very first round, but it's still a pretty high enough pick where we don't know. So beware. But they also have is Trent Williams, one of the star left tackles for San Francisco, is also holding out. So that's a newsworthy note of, you know, do you take Chris McCaffrey? He also is dealing with a calf strain, and we saw Joe Burrow deal with a calf strain, and that affected him for a lot. So it's one of those, be aware that things could happen. Um,
Mm.
I'll say this. We also saw this last week. Jameer Gibbs suffered a hamstring injury that they were saying is pretty minor, but he's going. Typically, Gibbs is going at the end of first rounds. So we'll see how far his ADP drops. He could drop as a 2-3 turn. I'm probably still fine taking Gibbs, especially if I start with a wide receiver, but knowing that the risk is still there, but the upside for him is still, it's really great for him. So it may see how much this impacts him, but watch for that ADP to kind of fluctuate and potentially fall.
Mm.
So those are, I think, there are other more news, of course, that comes out. One piece, not injury related. We've talked about the Denver Broncos as kind of a potential. Could they be a breakout offense this year that nobody's really looking at? And I don't know if this is just Sean Payton being, cloak and dagger. That's always what he does. But currently, Bo Nix is listed as a third string quarterback.
Mm.
Is this
Yeah,
news, or is this kind of a fluff? Let's click this because, oh, it's interesting and it's Sean Payton just being weird.
I think it's gotta be clickbait, right? I mean, Bo Nix looked really good actually. I actually watched some highlights of
Okay.
his game, and I mean, he did really well. And I think he was like 15 of 20 for I think he threw a couple touchdowns and had some runs, and like threw for 150 yards or something like that. Like
Yeah.
very impressive, very efficient. I personally think it's kind of the propaganda speak. I don't know. Maybe he really is third on the list. I don't know. I don't really see that happening. Um,
With the
but
other
I don't
two
know.
that they are, Jarrett Stidham, I'm sure Jarrett Stidham is a wonderful guy. I'm sure he's a great pal. Like everybody loves him. But is Bo Nix not better than Stidham or not better than Zach Wilson? I think they also brought in Zach Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we talked about the last few weeks. Is like we talked about this, and it's like, all right, these teams. It's not like there's two rookies, or it's
Right.
a Falcon situation where it's Kirk Cousins versus Michael Penix, where it's like this
Yeah.
like highly drafted rookie and a veteran who's very good. It's like we've seen Zach Wilson, we've seen Jared Stidham play. We know what their ability is. It's in the Sam Darnold realm, right? I would probably argue that Sam Darnold's a little better than those guys, actually, probably. And you've got a rookie who is older, more experienced, and threw the ball efficiently in this first game. So, I mean, to me, again, we're not coaches, we're not GMs, but to me, it may make sense to put the new guy in to see what you get out of him, right? Just because, and also he's older, he's like 25, so he's not going to get, he's not 21, he has some life
Mm-hmm.
experience, he's married, he's got a couple kids. That ages anybody, right? So, being able to being, and I think it's going to help, and I think him just being older is going to help. So, I think if they're the Broncos, it's got to be a bunch of fluff. There's no way that he's going to start the season third in the depth chart.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's more of a fluff and understanding. Um, Sean Payton just does these things. There are certain coaches that you can't always trust what they're going to say. So I would agree with that. It's just more interesting to bring up, and it's hard to evaluate rookies this time of year too, because whether if you play Dynasty, which you've then been following rookies the entire offseason, you kind of have your priors and what you want, but leading into then, since this is a redraft focused podcast, leading into what does that mean for this season only, looking at it from 1 year window. But I think that still means if Bo Nix isn't labeled a starter until right before week 1, then that means Denver players probably are going to be a little suppressed, which means there's potential value to be had if Bo Nix is actually the starter. So,
Yeah, I agree.
rookie valuations as we enter this time of year. So, I think that's kind of it for a lot of the news. Most of it's unfortunately injury related, which that's very tough. But yeah, that's why you don't do your drafts early in August. Do them later when you have more information. So, but
Yeah, exactly. And this is what's tough is a lot of people don't have that. But yeah, ideally Labor Day weekend's always really good, just to give you that week before, just to let everything settle as much as possible.
yeah. All right. Let's transition here. Rookie evaluations. We just got done talking about a rookie with Bo Nix.
Yep.
Rookie evaluations. How do we, or you want to take kind of approach first at rookie evaluations, your thoughts, and then we can kind of go back and forth?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for me with rookies, especially running backs, a struggle of mine and probably a lot of other people's is how do you evaluate running back talent where it isn't clear cut. For example, I'm going to exclude this year the Jonathan Brookses, where it's the best talent in the class, the first running back taken. Carolina trades up to get him. All these positive factors happen where it's like, if you have half a brain, you're going to say, oh, this is a good, he's going to get a starting role. It's going to be great. Perfect, right? I'm talking about more of the rookies that get drafted that can be backups to either veterans or maybe potentially you got a running back by committee system. So what I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are is, what are some general rules of thumb that we can look at to say like trends that we can see that like help you stash these players, because they're not going to get drafted in the first like 10 rounds, right? It's going to be, you're going to have these players, they're going to be on the bench, they're going to develop, they're going to get into the offense, and all of a sudden week 5, 6, 7 they become the starters, and you have this great value play that you have that leads you to the playoffs. So in your mind, what are you looking for? What are some keys? Are you looking at numbers? Are you looking at volume? Like, what are some things you're looking at?
I think some of the first things I'm looking at is opportunity. What's the potential opportunity? Now, rarely do we see a rookie come in. I would say rarely. I know it happens where you see a rookie, especially running back, come in and just take that team, take the league by storm, and just, I'm there. That's extreme talent. We've seen it. But even then, I think with all rookies, you have to allow for kind of a ramp up where it's going to be later in the season that it happens. So you're not going to look for it first of the year, which is where the draft capital of like, I can get them in the later rounds because they start slower. So I think opportunity and, excluding like Jonathan Brooks, because I think he's probably the clearest rookie running back to say he's going to take over that backfield, or at least has potential to take over that backfield because of who the starter is in front of him. That'd be the second part, is who's the starter in front of that rookie. If that rookie is on the depth chart as far as second in the depth chart, who's the starter? What's the risk that, or what's the probability that either the starter gets hurt or the rookie is actually just better than the starter, and it just takes a little bit of time for the rookie to get up to speed with the game, or have that, take that opportunity, and it becomes more of either a split or where they just take it over. that
Gotcha.
I'm
So
not.
what do you think
Yeah.
is? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I was gonna say, an example I can think about with a veteran stud running back would be like Saquon Barkley and Will Shipley with the
Yep.
Eagles, right? Where it's a situation where Barkley, like most other running backs, has an injury history. He's
Yep.
older. He's a great running back, highly drafted in the first, honestly, like the end of the first round, start of the second round in most drafts. And Will Shipley, showed a lot of problems at Clemson. Great
Mm-hmm.
athlete. What are you doing with him? Because are you going to draft him in like the are you drafting him under the pretense that you're thinking Barkley gets hurt? Like that has to be the pretense, right? Because Barkley's so good. But like, what would you spend? Like, what are you spending on him? If you have Barkley, right, he's valued higher, right?
Right.
I would assume if you got Barkley in the early second round, you might honestly in the eighth or ninth round, honestly, you might get Shipley because you have that handcuff to Barkley, right?
Yeah.
But like normally, are you looking at like that kind of like a backup to a stud? Are you looking at like a 12 to 15 range if you can grab them? Like, or are you just trying to handcuff the guys that you got early on?
I think from a draft strategy, if I'm handcuffing the guys that I already have, so if I drafted Saquon and I want to get Shipley, I think that's a floor play. And so I'll kind of expound on that a little bit. I'm limiting myself to one backfield only and saying this is the backfield I'm investing in, and saying I want whoever's in this backfield, and I don't care who's playing. So if Saquon gets hurt, because there's a greater chance, I want to have the backup. Because I've limited myself to just one backfield, if Saquon goes through the season, doesn't get hurt, I then am holding an asset that is very low value, lower than
Mm,
probably the way I drafted him. So how I would approach that then in my drafts is, so let's say I draft Saquon and somebody else in the league then drafts Kyron Williams, right? Around the same time, or maybe has them. I'd rather go after Blake Corum as the backup,
mm,
and I'm hoping to get in the double digit rounds if possible. There are some rookies that you have to go to the 9 to 12 round range, which it's late single. So depending on the rookie, it potentially could be worth that. But I don't want to overpay for that. I'll let somebody else overpay. But if I draft, say, Blake Corum and I have Saquon Barkley, if something were to happen to Kyron Williams, and if I believe Blake Corum is the as good of a talent or potentially better that could take over in another running back who has injury history from last year, I then have two starting running backs on two different teams.
mm.
So when I approach my
Okay.
drafts, I don't want to approach it as handcuffing my own running back. I want to look at handcuffing my own running back as we get to playoffs down the season. So I'd rather take
Okay.
as many stabs at different offenses in the later rounds. That's how I would approach it.
Okay. Gotcha. So you might look at it where you have starters and like you said diversify
Yep.
your situation because then what happens because same with stocks or anything else you put all your eggs in one basket then an offense implodes right
Right.
performs awful then you've doubled down on your draft picks on that
Right.
offense and it might be tough or impossible for you to get to a winnable
Right.
spot in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or let's say, Saquon goes down and Kyron goes down, but then you have Blake Corum. You still have a starting piece of an offense where it still could produce. Somebody else may have Shipley, but that's fine. Maybe you've then also drafted a Trey Benson, or you went after. Maybe it's not a rookie running back, but maybe it's an ambiguous backfield where it's like you have a Tajay Spears or Tony Pollard, where
Mm.
they're considered both to be the starter, and say, well, I'm going to grab one. And you and I touched on, why we would grab one versus the other, but say, I'm going to grab one. Well, if Tajay Spears go down and you have Pollard, all of a sudden you have the starter for another team. That is his workload increases. So I think you want to diversify as much as you can. and let your league mates drop players. Because again, it's a patience game too. If I'm drafting a backup, if I'm drafting a rookie that I think could take over, I have to have the understanding that it's going to take time. So I need to draft a starting team that I don't have to have a replacement right away, but I want the upside as
Gotcha.
well. So, yeah.
Nice. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's what we're kind of looking for here. Is looks like diversify your picks. Try to get your hands as many offenses as possible, both
Yep.
for trade value and just the fact of like gives you more options come by in injury season.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, it's there's a lot that you should consider, but um, yeah, if you're really, I would look at it as if I'm drafting my two running backs from the same team, that is like me putting a suspenders on and then putting a belt on as well. I put two things on to do the
Yep.
same thing. So,
Yeah. Makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, and there's exceptions maybe where
sure,
you have like a Jameer Gibbs and a Dave Montgomery last year
right,
where they both were playable, or like what 3 years ago with Tony Pollard and Zeke on the same
yeah.
offense where it made sense to play them both, and that's great, or whatever. But yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
Well, so
I get
like,
that.
and I think you're touching a little bit on. There's a difference between having a main running back and then having a backfield that's more ambiguous. Where an ambiguous backfield, and we mentioned it, like Tennessee. If you want to take a shot on, it's both Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears listed um, as the main running back. Cincinnati is also another one where it's Zach Moss, Chase Brown. These are going to be players that are vying for a position that if you again pick the right one, and we don't fully know which one's the right one, we can kind of go with, again, look at the news stories, not the clickbait, the fluff stories, understand who
Mm,
these players are, um, to kind of make that best judgment. Um, and knowing you might be wrong, but if you're then diversifying and saying, I'm going to grab a running back out of this backfield, running back out of this one, and know that, in the beginning of the league of the season, you may have, kind of well, a few things have to go right for this to happen, but it's possible. I'll throw one out that's a very, very, I'm gonna say a deep play, but I don't think it's as deep as we think. The rookie Jalen Wright out of Miami. So you're at the end of the draft. Let's say it's the 13th, 14th round, and you decide I'm gonna pick Jalen Wright. He is the third option on Miami right now. What has to happen for him to actually see the field?
mm,
We know Raheem Mostert is 32. And again, I'm going to say a 32-year-old is old, but in terms of football, 32 for a running back is old. He does have an injury track as well. Okay. Also, Devon Achane has one of the most upsides in the league as far as running back goes. He had a 50-point game or plus game last year as a rookie. So obviously he has game breaking speed. He also has injury history. Well, Jalen Wright is as big as Raheem Mostert, if not bigger, and as fast as Devon Achane. So if something happens to just one of those guys, Jalen Wright finds himself in a two-back committee, which is the way Miami operates. So
mm,
we never want to bank on injury, but the probabilities of injury is a real thing. Um,
mm.
and that's where that's how I'm going to look at why I would take, say, a Jalen Wright at the end of my draft versus somebody else saying, there's a path here and I can be patient because this is my fifth running back and I'm just going to see what happens.
Mm. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Which makes sense. I think you do have to look at it and see what you brought up a good point. What has to happen for my player to earn meaningful time in football games and therefore make points? I think that's a
Right.
good, because you can start really grasping for straws and be like, well, he's so good, the talent's here. It's like, okay, well, what if he's a rookie on the in the Ravens backfield at this point, right, or whatever,
Right.
and there's like buried so far deep, and that okay, what has to happen to for this player to actually be worth it?
Right.
Yeah, so makes sense. So I guess that will kind of transition to the next part of this, which I'm thinking is more of a who would you rather draft, or call them ADP
Mm.
wars. It's kind of a fun
Yes.
little thing that we can do.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple for you. I would love to hear kind of your commentary on what you would do. I'm going to do a couple tight ends for you, and a couple quarterbacks.
Okay.
And kind of want to hear your thought process on what you're looking for in the offenses and the players, and maybe kind of deep dive a little bit. So
Yeah.
one is I'll do tight ends first, and this will be interesting, maybe a split hairs situation. But Travis Kelce or Sam Laporta.
Ooh.
So I did these guys. This is a tough one. I kind of
Yeah.
this kind of mean one to do for the first one, but kind of background for everybody listening is both of these guys are going roughly the same ADPs, kind of like early fourth round. Both are productive, very good tight ends. The first two tight ends off the board. So, and your thoughts are, if the way that your draft falls to you, and you have either option, and you need a tight end, which one are you looking for and why?
If I'm drafting picking between these, I am trying to go for that stud tight end and saying I want a set it forget it type tight end. So in this, let's look at, they both come from very good offenses. Kansas City
Mm.
is, they saw a dip last year in what they did offensively, but Detroit also came on and they don't look like they're going to go anywhere. They brought all the coaching staff back. The offense looks good again. So it's a matter of, you have almost identical situations for these tight ends. Both, actually, Travis Kelce, I would say, is still the first read on a lot, but he is used in a hybrid wide receiver tight end role. We saw kind of the decline outside of playoffs. So the risk
Mm.
is Kelce is getting up there in age, especially for a tight end. He did sign an extension. So he got paid a little more money. But do we see Kansas City kind of use him as a, hey, we don't want to overuse you, so therefore we're not going to, we're not going to throw you with 10 targets a game. So that is a concern. On the other hand, Sam
Mm.
Laporta he was playing second fiddle to Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's also coming off a late ACL injury. So that's a major concern for me. And I know you can come back from ACL injuries a lot faster these days than you can for other days or other seasons. So medical technology has increased. So there's a lot going for that. If I'm taking a tight end here, I'm gonna take Kelce. The reason
Mm.
is we've seen it from him season in and season out. Last year was kind of a dip, but it was a dip for the entire Chiefs offense. It wasn't just Travis Kelce that the entire offense took a step forward. Sam Laporta had, I think, an unsustainable amount of touchdowns to what his targets, yards, everything said. He had more touchdowns than he should have. So I see a little bit of regression potentially coming from there for him. So
Mm.
if I'm choosing between these, I'm still probably taking Travis Kelce. And in the back of my mind, knowing he probably may see a reduction, but he still could get me 800 yards, 6 touchdowns, and still be a top 5 tight end because he can get me the production potentially most weeks for a tight end.
Mm.
I will also
Mm.
say there's
Yeah.
a little bit more. There's a little bit more to Kelce with. And I know the injury to Brown kind of hurts this, but they also drafted Worthy. I think Kansas City wants to get back to being able to throw deep, which will leave the middle and the short stuff in the field open. That is where Kelce plays. And that's what we saw
Mm.
them struggle with last year. So that's where I'm leaning Kelce. But your thoughts on that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree with you, and I think for me, um, they're pretty much the same in my mind, honestly, with production. But I think the difference for me, why I would choose Kelsey, is what you mentioned, the consistency. And in a spot like tight end where there just isn't a lot of options and the drop off is so severe,
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have a tight end who averages 10 a game, 10 points a game, versus one that can potentially get 12 or 13 but only has really 1 year under his belt, of course, of meaningful experience, and you're drafting off of the hype. Not saying hype that's misplaced. I think Sam
Right.
Laporta in the Lions offense is really good, but with tight end, like I think if you're going to pay top dollar, you need to go after one of the you're going for consistency because you want that position to be like you said, a set it and forget it. Kelsey doesn't really get injured. He's in the lineup. It might not be a super sexy 8 points, right? But he'll get your 7, 8, 10 points a game, which allows you to focus on other needs. And you're not having to plug and chug on your tight end every week.
Well, last year, you had to draft him in the first round if you wanted him
Yep.
because of what he did last season. So I'm able to draft him in the third or fourth round. That's a lot
Yep.
different than taking him in the first round. So I think,
Yep.
again, it's a great question, but it's a totally different. Well, I took him in the first round last year to burden me. Okay. That's not this year now. So that's also what I
Yep.
would look at.
Gotcha. Good idea. All right.
All
I got
right.
one more for you.
Okay.
So for quarterbacks, I have
Okay.
two here that different play styles, but again, a lot of people are kind of would compare them as equals. Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, both of them are going in the late fourth round. So if
Mm.
you if you have the tight end pick, you're not getting these guys. But if you're having to pick between the two of these guys, and the reason why I
Right.
picked them is you have Hertz, who obviously more mobile, and the mobility factor is big. Him and Lamar are probably the two best mobile quarterbacks in the game. And Mahomes, though, is a retooling situation, and we know with Hollywood Brown, the shoulders hurt, could be back week 3, week 1. We don't really know how that's going to shape up, or it's the wide receiver room is a little bit up in the air. You've got an aging Travis Kelsey. You have Xavier Worthy, who is the rookie, and then a veteran in Marquise Brown, who's coming in. But a lot of factors, right? Whereas Jalen Hurts has people who have been around him for a while. His cast hasn't really changed. So, you know, I guess fantasy wise, in I call us a half point 1 QB league, right? So
Right.
let's just clarify that, right? What are you? Who are you leaning towards and why?
And I think this is then the question of evaluating fantasy differently than how you would evaluate a real life situation for a
Yeah.
quarterback. So, as an NFL team, if I'm looking at this from an NFL lens, I want Mahomes all day long. But
Yes.
I'll just put that out there. And I think these are very close. Um, but so let's look at again. We saw, I think, the floor of Mahomes last year, where the offense was down, everything was down, and he was quarterback 12. So I think that is the floor for Mahomes, where it's that that's what he could do on a low end. You still have to pay top 5 price for Mahomes, despite him
Mm.
finishing that low last year. Now, do I think he's going to stay there this year? Probably not. If I know anything, Andy Reid and they do a very good job of understanding what their needs are. They've addressed those needs. So it would be kind of interesting to see how they bounce back. The one thing that Mahomes doesn't really do that Hurts does is he doesn't really rush. And so when you're talking that about for evaluating who I want for a fantasy aspect, I do want the quarterback that does provide some of the rushing ability. And he also has weapons with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. They brought in Saquon
Mm.
Barkley, who can be a pass catching back. So I think there's enough talent around him. And they brought in Kellen Moore as a new offensive coordinator because what was going on last year just wasn't working. We've seen Kellen Moore in LA with the Chargers, with
Mm-hmm.
Dallas. Both have success offensively with head coaches who weren't really offensive guys as far as their how they leaned is what they play called. So I would still say I'd want potentially I'd take Hurts because he provides that rushing upside with very good playmakers, very good pass catchers, and he still had a phenomenal season last year. Yes, it was a disappointing NFL one just because we saw them
Mm-hmm.
lose so much down the way on the back end of the season, but it was still a very good season fantasy wise for Hurts. So Hurts would be my thought there, and it's only because the rushing is there. Also, fully knowing Mahomes could just do whatever Mahomes wants, and he could kick everybody's butt. So
Yeah. Hmm. Good. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, good. I like the distinction of the real football versus fantasy because that's important
yes,
to note. But I think though is and obviously mobile quarterbacks have been a factor in fantasy for a long time. It's been over 10 years really. But I do think that adds an important aspect to the game. I mean, Mahomes, yes, he scrambles. His scrambling, I think, is definitely more of a situational aspect in playoff games or in tight games is not a part of his every his four down playbook.
right.
So now we saw that in 2018-19 for sure, right? We definitely saw more of that, but now he is trying to take care of his body and not do that as much. So I would tend to agree with you there. I do like the Hurts pick. I do think Saquon takes away a little bit from that, but at the
Yeah,
same time, I honestly, it's one of those like Saquon might take away, but also because of the threat of Saquon, he could Hurts could do a lot of read option.
right.
I don't know. Like he did some of that with the Eagles, but he didn't have as much of a threat, and so people were like, "Well, if the quarterback's sitting there with the ball in my gut, right, the linebacker is going to choose Jalen Hurts every time because he's the bigger threat." And now with Saquon, it's like you really have to stop making a decision, which yes, it might Hurts's fantasy value a little bit, but at the same time, because of that decoy in Barkley, he might have longer runs or he might have a lot more touchdowns too. Who knows?
Yeah,
It's hard to know, but I think overall the upside with Hurts being a quarterback is higher. I think this season than Mahomes.
I would agree. And the other argument is we saw it last year with the Chiefs. They have a great defense still, and they played in a manner that they could run the ball with Pacheco, didn't have to rely on Mahomes, and could play really good defense and didn't have to score a whole lot of points. So while yeah, Saquon does potentially limit some of the ceiling for Hurts, there's also a real possibility that Kansas City could just say, yeah, we have the ability to go score 35 points again every game if we need to, but we have the
Yep.
ability now to score 17 points and we're going to limit you to 14 points. And hey, look, there we go. We still won and it's fine. So I think both those are very real possibilities.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think that it's good though to talk through it, and understand like if
Yeah,
either one falls through, you're not disappointed, but it's like what's going to work best. Again, it's all about value, right? Because I think honestly, all the players in the top 10 rounds, we all could draft. It's just a matter of how our team comp is, and are you reaching? Are you picking the best value? Are you complementing what your strategy is? Right. That's all. That's what it's about.
yeah, it's taking into what's the risk. If I take this player, what's the risk of is this other player? If I draft Hurts, will Mahomes kill me when I have to face him? And during those weeks, is that going to kill my ability to potentially win the league? So I think that's
Yeah.
also is that player going to hurt me that much? So I've got a wide receiver one for you to kind of think about, and I'll
Okay.
give some of my thoughts. So these two players, wide receivers 7 and 8. Again, this is a single quarterback PPR league. One is going at, they're both going end of the first round, early second round. So Garrett Wilson or Marvin Harrison Jr.
Oh man, that's a good one. Um, Goodness. Okay. So I think so. I'll be honest with you. I think that there is, as a fantasy football player, there is definitely scarring that happens against the Jets, bias against the Jets that happens because they've been
Yep.
so bad for so long that you instantly look at a Jets player and you say, "This is like I don't think this is going to work. This is just
Right.
not it's just not good value." Um, what I'm so here's what I'm thinking is I think I like Wilson, and the reason why is purely one answer: Aaron Rodgers. And I think what you have to do is, yes, I think Kyler Murray is a good quarterback, and yes, I think Marvin Harrison is going to get volume. But with Aaron Rodgers, he is one of the most efficient quarterbacks
Mm-hmm.
ever to play the game. And I think that while I think the volume going to Wilson is not going to match Marvin Harrison Jr., the fact that Wilson has more experience and also has been at least practicing with Aaron Rodgers for 2 years. Obviously, last year was a complete disaster with his Achilles, but I'm leaning Wilson. But I'll be 100% honest. If I'm stuck in that spot, it's a real tough situation for me because like I don't, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't necessarily
Yep.
love either of those guys, but it's a good one. I mean, I'm probably leaning Garrett Wilson just because rookies can. Again, there are definitely cases of rookies coming out of the gates, receivers, and being incredible, but the problem is the Cardinals just aren't really good, and I could see game script and a lot of other stuff working against the Cardinals. And like you say, oh, game script, that means they're going to throw the ball a lot, but I could see a lot of Kyler Murray just running for his life and a lot of more dump offs to McBride or their whole running back by committee disaster they have going on there. So to me, like I think Wilson's more of a clear cut target, and I like his connection with Rodgers. I probably would pick Wilson.
Any concern about Rodgers being a 40-year-old quarterback coming off the Achilles? Does that hurt your thought process at
Yeah.
all?
Um, Good question. I think yeah, there is, but it's kind of like Kelsey for me.
Okay.
Until he plays a season and he's not good, then I'm still going to trust him. I mean, Aaron Rodgers has put together in the last 5 years, right? I mean, he's put together MVP caliber seasons, and the only reason why he hasn't won them is because of people like Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and others who have been incredible.
Right.
So, like, it's kind of a situation where like LeBron could have won 5 MVPs if these other people hadn't, also had crazy seasons. So to me, I'm that way. I think if Aaron Rodgers plays a full year and we see him decline, then it's like, okay, you're done. It's like Brady, for example, his last year. Like we didn't see him go down to like QB 18, but instead of being like QB 5 or 6, he was more like 12 or 11. Lots of volume, wasn't as efficient in fantasy as he could have been. So we saw that, right? He retired, and it was like, okay, we saw the decline. With Aaron Rodgers, is a freak injury, right? And other
Mm-hmm.
than of course his Achilles, he hasn't had the wear and tear of last season. So you would think like, yes, he's 40, but it could be the good cocktail mixture for him to like feel good for a solid year because he has this is his what year 2 of his deal, right? He's got a
Yep.
2 year thing with the Jets, so like
Yep.
this could be the final hurrah. But yeah, I think you got to take the risk. I mean, you won't have to take the risk, but I think if Garrett Wilson's a great player and Aaron Rodgers is very efficient, so I think you got to do it, in my opinion.
What? Yeah, and I would agree with that because I think we've seen Garrett Wilson not play up to his potential, I would say, but he's produced with very lackluster quarterback play to this point in his career. Whereas Marvin Harrison, I have concerns that we are drafting off of name value only because he's the son of Marvin Harrison. He's the son
Mm-hmm.
of a great wide receiver. We don't have any numbers. He didn't test in the offseason. He didn't do any of that. Um, it's been reported out of camps again where to, kind of look at he has trouble separating from good corners. So I think there's some level of concern to say I don't disagree with you. I think he's the first read. He is going to be the first read for Tyler. He has the ability to potentially get peppered with targets, and he has some ability. I just don't know if it's this generational ability that a lot of people have put onto his name to say, well, I'm going to take him over all these guys because this is what he's going to produce. That's
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
hesitation with taking somebody like Harrison Jr. over a Garrett Wilson. Yeah, there's risk, but I'd rather take the risk that if the quarterback goes down, it hurts my wide receiver. That's a lot of wide receivers. If Jared Goff goes down, Amon-Ra St. Brown is hurt because
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same quarterback. But I don't want to draft in fear of like, well, what if the quarterback goes down? Well, we don't know
Mm-hmm.
that Rodgers is going to tear his Achilles again. We hope he doesn't, but we just don't know that. So I'd be agreeing with you on I'd choose Wilson just because we've seen that production, and we're hoping now for the top level production from him that he has the ability to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think you can't be scared of injuries. Obviously, there's a history and you have the option, pick it. But again, it's been a kind of running theme the last few weeks. Your look at your options. You're
Mm-hmm.
wanting more sure bets. So is a future Hall of Fame quarterback throwing to a veteran receiver in their prime going to be a more sure pick than a quarterback throwing to a rookie receiver, regardless of talent level, on a team
Right.
that isn't as good, right? Like you can play the game all you want, and like there are definitely good fantasy players and bad football situations. There's tons of those out there, but when you're looking at that, you can start convincing yourself like, oh, this is gonna be fantastic. I've got this value. Like, you start like doing all this mental gymnastics to settle on the fact that like he's gonna be great. And like he might be great, and he might be the fantasy value of a fourth round pick. The thing is, the name in Ohio State and a lot of other things are carrying that, and I just think it's a lot to bank on, especially with someone who hasn't played an NFL snap yet, right? And of course,
Right.
like you draft him, you're like, like you're wrong. It's like, yeah, that's part of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
but at the same time, if you're picking a proven asset versus a rookie, I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah. All right. We got to hit the running back position just because we'll get through all
Okay.
four. And so these aren't going to be quite near as spicy, but I kind of picked these as we've hit on kind of thoughts about draft strategy, and next week we'll do a mock draft and kind of look at draft strategy a little bit more in depth. But it's very popular right now to go with like a zero running back approach or very heavy wide receiver early on, which then means you're having to pick some running backs in later rounds. So I wanted to throw these two out because I'm going to explain one situation, and it kind of explains the situation for them both. It's a team that is not projected to do very well as a team. Um, they both come from a team that doesn't project very well. It's either a young quarterback or a journeyman of a veteran quarterback that's going to
Hmm.
play, but we don't know who. The offensive line is not one of the best, so there's going to be some issues with the line. However, this team, they both brought in backups from different teams, so both these running backs appear to have the bulk of the workload potentially projected to them. One catches the passes, or one's more of a pass catcher than the other, but that's the situation for both these. So I'm talking
Okay.
about both. They're both going the 6th round, and again, this is a single quarterback PPR league. Both in the 6th round. One is Ramondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots, and the other one is Zamir White for the Raiders.
Oh man. It's a good
Especially
question.
after giving kind of the context of what the situation is. This feels like it's an ugly pick, but if you go with a, let's say, hero or a zero running back approach, you're looking at these types of rounds as I'm taking my first running back, or hey, I can get my RB2. This is a real potential
Yeah.
consideration for some teams.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good point, and we talked about Zamir White before.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting, why I like Zamir White, and I think that's my decision, and then I'll kind of explain this a little bit. Is I like, I think Luke Getsky is the new offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
I think that overall, the breath of fresh air that's going to happen now with Josh Jacobs in Green Bay, and overall, I think that with, there hasn't really been as much. There's been like no opposition to him rising to the top of the depth chart. It's pretty much been like he. I think he has potential to be a breakout. I think we mentioned a little bit a few weeks ago when we did the AFC West, but it's, I think, what's really hampering his value is being on the Raiders. I think that, we talked about this, right? Both situations, like, not ideal. They're not perfect quarterback situations for either of these teams or offensive situations, but the Raiders, I think, could lend themselves. I like how their defense plays. I overall think Max Crosby is a fantastic player, and I think that I could see Zamir White getting higher quality touches than Stevenson overall, and I think just overall just playing better from a fantasy perspective. Um, I again, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but I do like how he basically wasn't really opposed when he came. Like when Josh Jacobs was hurt, he just like rose to the top of the list, and like you pretty much had him. If you had him in Dynasty, you had him. If not, there was a mad rush. Like I think it was the moment that Josh Jacobs officially got injured, right? Like if you didn't have him handcuffed and you were a Josh Jacobs owner, I mean, there's a lot of waiver capital that people spent on Zamir White. So
Yeah.
probably my pick. You might disagree, which is great, but that's who I'm leaning towards.
No, I think it's kind of splitting hairs because I think the one
Yep.
thing that Ramondre Stevenson has going for him over Zamir White is he is a pass catcher. They also brought in
Mm,
Antonio Gibson, who is also a pass catcher. So there's potentially some ability or some limited opportunities because of that. We also don't know what this new coaching staff in New England is going to be doing. Um, we do kind of have a little bit of the blueprint that what they want to do in Vegas is they want to run, they want to play good defense. I'm not always one to go with the argument of the volume is there and nobody else is going to take that because I think that's a very susceptible argument to make. You can poke a lot of holes in that. But I
mm,
think with the added value that the Raiders still have Devontae Adams on the team, whether he's traded or not, we don't know. But at this point, with the information we have, it's still Devontae Adams. That's still a weapon that, yes, he is not the same potentially Devontae Adams that we've seen in years past. He still is a very highly valued target for that team. That helps
mm-hmm.
with potentially, taking some of the pressure off the defense. So I'm probably going to lean White, but I think it is close. And again, as we are in our drafts, it's fully knowing how some of these picks, there is risk, there's downside. And I think we hit on a lot of the downside, where a lot of what I hear for the upside is they're going to get all the touches. Just look at them. They're just going to get all the touches. And I think that's a very, yes, that's possible. But what does that actually look like? And is that actually what we want for our team, for our, fantasy players we're drafting? So
Mhm.
it's more bringing that out as well. I'll be negative a little bit on some of my thought process.
Yeah, no, I mean that's good. Like again, like these guys are if you're considering both of them, right, at this point, you're probably going with either a hero RB or a zero RB situation where you are trying to fill some of these extra spots in your roster. You know, you're not seriously considering these guys for your RB1 spot unless you went really heavy on running backs and tight ends and quarterbacks and everything else. So, but yeah, I mean, it's good discussion,
Yeah.
right? Because this is kind of the later round running backs that you have to think about because, again, not that you can make a wrong decision, like, but you can make a less ideal, less optimal one,
Right.
and it could end up, again, something like this is an easy league winner because then if you aren't really paying attention or aren't seeing the patterns, then you could end up with someone who's ride your bench for the whole season.
Right. And I think that's also then, if as we're approaching draft, if we're thinking, hey, if the draft falls my way, I think that's where, I don't want to get tied to, I have to draft this style. This is the way I have to draft, because if I don't, then I'm going to lose out on value. Well, if I draft a zero RB approach and 3/4 of my league is also drafting a zero RB approach, then all of a sudden the wide receiver value goes out the window, and I can start getting some value at other position because I'm going to go a little different way. So, yeah, it's just, I think it may be that thought of thinking, well, I might be able to do a zero RB, but I may have to modify it, or hey, this player's fallen to me, and if I take a running back in round 4, like say I take Ken Walker in round 4, whether you like him or
Mm-hmm.
not, instead of taking a wide receiver, and then the 6th round, or yeah, in the 6th round, then I'm taking, Chris Godwin or Rashi Rice, Keenan Allen type player instead of, the Whites or Ramondre Stevenson. So it's knowing how to navigate where the value really is, and not saying, well, I have to draft this position only. So
Mm. Yep, good point.
yeah. All right. Well, we are about at time here tonight, but Grant, a lot of different things we could talk about, but I think it's good to remind everybody again, practice clickbait disciplined. Let's listen to what's actually um, real news out there. And yeah, understanding how to value certain situations or rookies coming in. We all get hyped with, it's the new thing, it's the new toy, it's the new thing, it's the rookie. Let's get very excited. And on some of that, I think we should, but on some of that we should be kind of cautious a little bit and understanding
Yeah.
what are we excited about.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind that like we are playing a game of a game, right? So
Yep.
when it comes to head coaches and stuff, they it's strategy, right? They don't want opponents to know immediately off the rip that X quarterback is going to be the starter. I mean, if like the Broncos can keep it under wraps until a few days before or a week before a game, that helps their opponent, or sorry, it allows their opponents less time to analyze and look at tape. Right, simple as that. So again, a lot of noise needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Obviously, injury stuff, if it's severe and it's part of the situation, then it is what it is, and we that's more factual. But a lot of speculation on depth chart and things like that, it's going to be really tough to distinguish until we get to like week 1, week 2, when we have starters in
Yep.
place that allow win games. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I think next week we're going to be doing a mock draft. We'll do that live and
Sweet.
kind of go with how we like to value those and just kind of do a little practice run. And I think it's a good time as ADPs will start to kind of shift as we get more redraft data in mock drafts. We'll kind of see how players are shifting. So anyway,
Definitely looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun.
yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. Be a lot of fun to do mock draft together. So any words of wisdom as we've given so much out already tonight? Any words of wisdom as we again prepare one more week to prepare for our fantasy drafts?
Yeah, I think I mean, honestly, kind of echo what you said at the start, which was look at the situation, look at the coaching staff, look for consistency, right? And later rounds, you can take those dart throws, try to really focus
Mm,
on the first few rounds, trying to get as consistent as possible.
yeah. Upside is for later rounds specifically, I would say.
For sure.
But yeah,
For sure.
definitely. And I'll just say for me, it's don't draft last year's statistics. So 1 year is great, but don't just say I'm going to draft based on what they did last year only, or I'm not drafting based on what they did last year only. All of that is in context. So understand the context around why that
Hmm.
player produced or why they did not. That would be my parting thoughts for tonight. But, well, Grant, as always, it's a pleasure to be around this redraft roundtable together, talking about fantasy football. But
Yeah,
we
it's a great
will,
time. Always fun and looking forward to the season that's coming ever closer. And yeah, excited for next week and our mock draft.
yeah. Well, with that, we will leave you all for this week and we'll join you next week. But thanks for joining us tonight. We will see you next time.